Oasis Audio presents America the Strong by William J. Bennett and John T. Cribb. Read for you by John McLain. Introduction. The purpose of this book is to explain what conservatism means. It explains basic conservative principles, the reasons conservatives stand for them, and how they apply to challenges our country faces. We live in a time when many Americans feel uncertain about the future. They worry about jobs and the economy. They worry about whether the next generation will have a standard of living as high as previous ones. Distrust of major political institutions runs deep. There are concerns about whether the country is on the right path, and even if it might be in decline. Conservative principles speak to these problems. The United States was founded on conservative principles, and they helped America become a great and strong nation. They can help keep it strong for generations to come. For that to happen, each generation must pass those principles on to the next. Each generation has to offer clear explanations of certain ideas and values to young people as they reach adulthood. That responsibility has much to do with whether the next generation's future is dim or bright. The idea for this book grew from questions a smart teenager asked her dad, one of the book's co-authors, John Cribb. The questions came during their drives to school while listening to Bill Bennett's Morning in America, the conservative talk radio show hosted by this book's other co-author. Questions like, why do terrorists want to kill Americans? And, what do you think about global warming? And, why shouldn't rich people pay all the taxes? And this one, exactly what is a conservative anyway? They're the kind of questions some bright young people start to ask when they're in high school or college, or perhaps when they start to vote or get their first full-time job. Questions they ask when they begin to realize that events in the news really do affect them, their family, their friends, and their country. What is a conservative? This book answers that question, and more than 100 others, about issues ranging from immigration to illegal drugs. It examines issues from a conservative standpoint and explains why conservative ideas are good for our country. If you are a young person just beginning to pay attention to current affairs and politics, there are a couple of things you should know. The first is that nearly 40% of Americans consider themselves conservative. Nearly 25% consider themselves liberal, the opposite of conservative. So conservatives outnumber liberals by a fairly wide margin. The second thing you should know is that despite their numbers, conservatives sometimes face questions and even sneering remarks about the values they stand for. Portions of the culture tend to depict conservatism as backward and wrong-headed. They may try to convince you that conservatives are mean-spirited, greedy, prejudiced people. Most of the national mainstream media news organizations in the United States have a strong liberal bias. That includes ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, PBS, and NPR. Fox News is the major exception. It also includes influential newspapers like the New York Times and the Washington Post. Liberal journalists outnumber conservative journalists in overwhelming numbers. Only 7% of journalists identify themselves as Republicans, a largely conservative political party. 4 times as many identify themselves as Democrats, a largely liberal party, and there is little doubt that the 50% who say they are independent generally lean left. Many reporters claim to be objective, but they slant their news coverage to favor liberal causes and put conservatives in a bad light. Hollywood, likewise, is a famously liberal place, and many of the television programs and movies it produces have the same bias. They carry messages that belittle the values and attack the institutions many Americans respect. Messages like sleeping around is fine, religious people are nuts, and businessmen don't care about poor people or the environment. College campuses may be the most anti-conservative places in the country. Liberal professors dominate most faculties. At many universities, conservative ideas are shouted down or cut off. Instructors feel free to mock conservatives in the classroom, and administrators pay scant attention when their posters are torn down or their sensibilities offended, writes a rare conservative.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?